الله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله عليه صلاة الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الأمين الحليم الكريم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وأصحاب سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. All praise be to Allah, Lord of the heavens and the earth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower His blessings on His beloved messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, on the family and the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Today is the third session in the series of lectures, talks about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, journey with the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And I know so many of you have been asking whether you can get these notes. And I'm pleased to say that Brother Najm, who films these and also records these programs, he's put on YouTube the very first series, the first session of these series. So from now onwards, inshallah, before the next one, we will have the last one on YouTube. So you can obviously watch or listen to it on your iPhones, etc. Just as a reminder, because obviously all of these sessions that we cover, while you are in the session, or even a few weeks after the session, a few days after the session, they might be very fresh in your mind, but you're very easily going to forget. So today, inshallah, we are going to cover from the blessed age of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from 6 to 25, and that's nearly it's nearly 20 years, but 19 years to be precise. And just as a summary, I think just to refresh your memories, we've covered the background of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet's family, and then how his father was about to be sacrificed, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved him, and then the year of the elephant, how Abraha, being one of the kings of Habasha, he came to demolish the Kaaba, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his elephants were actually killed by little birds. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the story in Surah Fil, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. And then the father of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the mother getting together in marriage. So Abdullah, his marriage to Amina, may Allah be pleased with both of them. And then the blessed birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the miracles that surrounded the blessed birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then the Prophet, peace be upon him, living with foster parents, and then splitting of the chest. We talked about how even the angels, they must have been sterilized, and how before we all came to know about open heart surgery of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a reference to that in the Holy Quran by saying, Alam nashrah laka sadrak. And that could refer to a number of other incidents in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But simply what is saying that, have we not expanded your bosom, have we not expanded your heart, so that your heart is not going to be like any other person's heart in this world. Then we talked about the Prophet ﷺ visiting Medina with his mother, because the Prophet's father was buried and is buried in Medina Munawwara, and that was because he was on a journey, and he got ill while in Medina Munawwara, and he passed away, and his grave is there. And because Amina, the Prophet's mother, had not visited her husband's grave, and when the Prophet ﷺ came back from his foster parents, Halima, Sa'di and Harith, the Prophet ﷺ was taken by his mother to the grave of his father. But while they were there, Amina radiallahu ta'ala anha, she started feeling ill, and then she decided that they should actually leave Medina and go to Makkah Mukarramah, to their home as soon as possible. But obviously in those days journey took a lot longer, and while they were at a place called Abwa, which is only which is not very far from Medina Munawwara, she got so ill that they couldn't undertake any further journey, and there the Prophet's mother passed away there. So we were there in the last session. Now moving on, then obviously now if you think about it, the divine plan that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what nature does to him, snatches away his father even before he is born, and then actually he's got no mother at the age of 6. Now, most of us have brothers or sisters or nephews and nieces. Imagine 6-year-old, so young, and that person, in a way, in a very hierarchical culture in Arabia, where literally no one cares about no one, the Prophet has got no mother, no father, no parents. He's left in the desert with a slave girl, a Baraka, known by the name of Baraka, and she brings him back to Makkah Mukarramah. Now, the Prophet ﷺ has a number of uncles and also his grandfather. Grandfather being Abdul Muttalib, just before on that chart, just before Abdullah. So Prophet Muhammad, and then Abdullah, the father of Prophet ﷺ, and then Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, at that, by then he is over 90. Some say he's about 93. Others say that he was nearly 100. So in 90 or whatever might be the age of Abdul Muttalib, he's obviously a very elderly person, and he takes the guardianship of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he is also, in himself is very, very sorry that actually, his son Abdullah was the most beautiful, most handsome son, most handsome person the Arabia had ever seen, and he's passed away. And then his only legacy is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And usually, obviously, you would think that if the mother was alive, mother would look after him, mother would take care of him, and therefore the son will grow up as a very fine person, and will actually, the name of Abdullah will remain in the history. Because otherwise, if you think about it, if 6 years, Abdul Muttalib, at the back of his mind, he's also got, the thought that he might not be alive tomorrow. He's so elderly. And in some of the books of history, it's also narrated that he was losing his eyesight as well. Basically, he was losing his eyesight, if you like. And so, very feeble, very weak, and he is thinking, what is going to happen to my grandson, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, some of the scholars have actually tried to explain, we can never understand the ultimate design, the ultimate destiny, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed each one of our lives, and what were the reasons that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took away the two most beloved people from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all know that naturally no one loves more than the actual parents, especially as a young child. No one, no uncle, no aunt, no one, basically grandparents, they can't love you in the same way as your parents would do. And so how come Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deprived his own beloved, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, from that parental love? Now scholars have tried to explain that although there's an element of love with the parents, but also there's an element of authority. Ultimately, as a young person, the number of people have authority over you. You may listen to them or you may not listen to them. But ultimately, the parents are always seen as authoritative figures. They have some sort of authority over you. You are expected to listen to them. You are expected to do as they tell you to do. And more, if you think about it from the mother and father, who has the more authority? the father, because as a man figure, it's just naturally the men tend to have more authority, just generally speaking, and therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is only one of the interpretations, one of the explanations, that authoritative figure was already taken by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to this world. So that not even once any person, any human may say something or may show authority to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't even like that even the parents may at some point try to show their authority over Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the father was taken away even before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, and then mother very quickly. In a way, he only lived with his mother for 2.5 years after he came back from his foster parents from Halima Sa'diyah, and he stayed there for a very short period of time. And even in that period of time, he went on a journey to Medina Munawwarah. So this is only one of the explanations as to why the parents of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were taken away. Another explanation is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to be the leader of mankind, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was taken through a number of stages, number of experiences in his life, so that he could relate to all kinds of people. And I touched upon it in the last session as well. If you think about it, he was born he belonged to an aristocrat family, but was raised by a black woman. He belonged to nobility, to the noble family of Arabia at that time. So much so that I explained to you in the last session that after the year of elephant, people started thinking, don't mess with Quraysh. They have direct contact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the heavens. And therefore, they had that authoritative oomph about them, authoritative demeanor about them, that nobody wanted to mess with the Quraysh. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went through those experiences so that he could relate to people, he could relate to orphans, he could relate to those, and there's so many of those people, young children today in our world, that have no father, no mother, and actually living in a very, very destitute circumstances. So the Prophet ﷺ's parents are taken away, they pass away, and as I said, we can only try to think as to what were the reasons for that. And then Abdul Muttalib takes the guardianship of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, Abdul Muttalib, he is a noble figure. He is basically, if you think about it, the governor of Makkah at that time. And Makkah is not a backward town. Makkah is a town where traders used to come from Syria to Makkah, and then they used to go to Yemen. So Makkah is in the middle. Now, when there's so much traveling going on in a particular city, the city is very different. The culture of the city is very different from culture of a city where there's no communication with the outer world. And the difference, if you really want to see it, if you think about the difference between London and Leeds, it's huge difference. Because of that communication with the outer world. Similarly, France and Seville, the different or Paris and another city in a Paris, the difference will be quite remarkable, incredible, because that city, a city which is capital, where there's so many people come from different parts of the world, they bring their own culture to that city, and they leave some of the marks of their culture. And we've already covered that what used to happen. The traders, when Khan Aqaba, he had idols. The traders that used to come from Syria, from Yemen, from other places, they used to bring their own god, a small little god, and place it in around Khan Aqaba, so that they have some presence in Makkah Mukarramah. And like that, it became a very cultural city. Now, being governor of that cultural city, Abdul Muttalib commanded a lot of respect. And Abdul Muttalib was at that time, if you think about it in terms of experience, he was the one who went to see Abraha and actually said to Abraha that I don't care what you do, the Lord of the house, Khan Aqaba, will save, and I'm here to save my own camels. And in a way, people don't know what communication, what conversation took place between Abraha and Abdul Muttalib But what people do know is because of Abdul Muttalib, Makkah was saved and Makkah was not conquered by Abraha. So as a result, Abdul Muttalib is commanding a lot of respect. And so Abdul Muttalib used to have, if you think about a governor of Makkah Mukarramah, he used to have his stage. And in his stage, if you can imagine whatever kind of stage you want to imagine, but basically he used to sit leaning against Khana Kaaba, and everyone else will sit in front of him. No one will sit next to Abdul Muttalib, and no one will sit next to Khana Kaaba. Now why is that important? Abdul Muttalib had a number of sons, including Abu Lahab, Abu Talib, Zubair, a number of Hamza, a number of other sons. And no one would dare come on that stage because of respect. And Arabia was a very hierarchical culture. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at the age of 6, he comes under the guardianship of Abdul Muttalib. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to go and sit next to Abdul Muttalib. Now people, even Abu Talib and other people, his own uncle, saying, Muhammad, what are you doing? You can't sit there. You know it's the stage for our father, and there's so many other leaders in Makkah, and you young lad think that you're so important that you're going and sing on the stage. But Abdul Muttalib used to say, no, let him sit there. So it's already divine plan that at an age of 7, where there's already so in terms of so much hierarchical culture, and so many other leaders cannot sit, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is already given that commanded position such an early age. Not only that, Abdul Muttalib being the governor, when a matter used to come for him to make a decision on, to judge on, so if you think about a judge of that, of Makkah Mukarramah as well, Abdul Muttalib used to say to his grandson Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what do you think about this? Now they're like, we've got people like some of those people. I talked about how hot-headed those people were, and they're saying, what's going on here? Now a young lad, 7-year-old, is going to decide on our matters. Are we that weak? Where is our manhood gone? It was a slur on their manhood that a young lad is deciding or giving opinion to Abdul Muttalib. And if we think about it, like this is like a 95-year-old saying to, let's take the example of a queen. We've got queen, then we've got Prince Charles, then we've got Prince William, and tomorrow a Kate gives birth to a young person, and that is at the age of 5, and queen goes, what do you think? And what's going to happen to Prince Charles, and what's going to happen to Prince William, and what people are going to think? All over the paper they're going to say, where is the manhood of William and Charles gone? That a young person is deciding on matters. So in the context, but Abdul Muttalib used to always say, فَوَاللَّهِ إِنَّ لَهُ لَشَأْنًا. فَوَاللَّهِ, he used to swear that I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I have a sha'n about this young person, about this young child. Now sha'n is like he's going to reach some high status. Now Abdul Muttalib couldn't think of if you like, couldn't really, sometimes we feel things but we can't really explain to others, and especially if others are not feeling them. Abdul Muttalib could see that this young member of his family is going to go places. He is now, I'm using very frank language for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is not really appropriate to his status, but the reason is we have a lot of young people in the audience as well. It's just so that they can understand a bit of the what's happening at that age with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so he will say, let him come forward. When people will try to stop him, he will say, let him come forward. My son will have a high status. That used to be the in terms of what Abdul Muttalib thought about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now also it is narrated in the history that a famine struck Makkah Mukarramah. Kahab basically struck Makkah Mukarramah. As a result of that famine, a lot of cattle was lost. Basically, no crops are growing, nothing is happening, and as a result, the animals started dying. And there's so much. So basically, if you think about a situation like in Africa, parts of Africa, like Somalia, other places, how weak people are, and they've got no food, animals got no food, etc. And the same kind of, the famine struck Makkah Mukarramah at that time. Now, the Abdul Muttalib, then they say that when it reached its peak, now they obviously they tried all sorts. Especially the society, they used to worship idols, and as a result, they went to the Rasulullah sallallahu. They went to those idols, and then also some people went to Abdul Muttalib saying, you are the governor, you have to come up with something. So Abdul Muttalib, one day, he took his grandson and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he called everyone, said, one member of each tribe, if you come, we will go to a mountain called Abu Qubais. So if you could remember that, Abu Qubais is going to come up again. Now that was one of the mountains in Makkah Mukarramah where they used to go whenever something strange, something unusual, something extraordinary was going to happen. They will go up there and announce it. In other words, if someone was standing at that mountain, Abu Qubais, people would listen to it. Because people wanted to know what's happening. So if you think about it, it's like news. And those days we have a news every hour, and give us 2 minutes and we'll give you the world. In those days, perhaps it's after 2 months. Someone will get on Abu Qubais and they will want to make an announcement. So they went there, and it is narrated that because of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdul Muttalib prayed, and because of that, then the rain came and the famine ended. So very early on, because of the miracles surrounding Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, people of Makkah are already getting some respite, getting relief, if you like. They know extraordinary things are happening because of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now then, but unfortunately, the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with his grandfather Abdul Muttalib for only 2 years. So how old was Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, passed away? 8. 8 years old, and his grandfather passes away. Well, he gives away that. And then the Prophet ﷺ is utterly dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also close to the most destitute among people. So going back to that point, now it's a tragic 2 years. He just lost his mother, and he was just about finding his feet, and he loses his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Again, the question arises why that is happening to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of the explanations I just gave about 10-20 minutes ago. Now another explanation that scholars give is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him just to be dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all these human factors that we have in our lives that we depend upon. I mentioned why, perhaps one of the reasons his father was taken away. I mentioned one of the reasons why his mother was taken away at such an early age. And now Abdul Muttalib. Now the reason, in a way, if you think about it, what was the role of Abdul Muttalib? That the Prophet ﷺ came under his guardianship. He was to establish that status. That no one would come near Abdul Muttalib and sit on that stage, and that young child, Rasulullah ﷺ, is given that stage by Abdul Muttalib himself, his grandfather. And people actually, no one can, it's not just given the status. When Rasulullah ﷺ used to give opinion to Abdul Muttalib, and he used to make a judgment on that, no one could actually find any fault in it. So the status is very quickly established. Now if you think about it, perhaps if Rasulullah ﷺ had father, sometimes you're not given that status, because no one would, Abdul Muttalib would not have to take the guardianship of Rasulullah ﷺ, and as a result, Rasulullah ﷺ would not have to be that attached to his grandfather to be actually following his grandfather wherever he went. So there's always reason why perhaps when you're looking at things, things are not apparent to us, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in mysterious ways, and no one can really understand his mysterious ways of working. Now, during the time of even Abdul Muttalib, one of the uncles of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, which is not that much mentioned in history, and we don't really tend to hear about it, was Zubayr, which was the second eldest son to Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather. And he used to also look after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam during the time when Abdul Muttalib was looking after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he carried on. But he falls away. Now, when it comes to Abdul Muttalib, his eyesight is losing as well. He was losing his eyesight as well, and also becoming very weak. Now, he knows that his time is up, and he is soon going to leave this world. Now, he is thinking to whom he can give Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now, he had a number of sons, and they all had different personalities. Like I already mentioned, Zubair was looking after partly, or contributing towards the looking after of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But Zubair was perhaps a mild personality, working behind the scene. And if you perhaps sometimes leave someone, with the one that only likes to work behind the scenes, he may not be able to look after as well as someone who's out there, and therefore the Prophet ﷺ would get exposure to the outer world. Then on the other extreme, he had Abdul Uzza. Abdul Uzza is known as Abu Lahab. His real name was Abdul Uzza. Uzza was one of the key lords, the god of Makkah, and he was named after that god, saying the servant of that god. He came to known as Abu Lahab. But he was basically too feisty, too fiery. He was always out there, and the fear was that one day, he might just open a fight with someone, and he might be wiped off. The potentially possibility there, and therefore, if you leave, a young child with that person, there's a danger that person might have to move on to another person very shortly, etc. Now, one of the uncles was known as Abd Manaf. And Abd Manaf was, if you actually name of one of the ancestors on the last sheet of paper, Abd Manaf, who came to known as Abu Talib. His real name was Abd Manaf. Now, there were a number of things about him. He was a very calm and balanced person, and also his Abu Talib's mother and Abdullah's mother, they had the same mother. Zubair, his mother was different. Abdul Muttalib being the same father, but mother was different. But Abu Talib and Abdullah, their mothers were the same. And as a result, Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather, thought that actually Abu Talib will look after more than any other son. And because of the personality of Abu Talib as well, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was given by Abdul Muttalib, made sure that, and he told all of his sons, he invited all of his sons, saying, after I've left, whenever I leave, Abu Talib is going to look after my grandson who's got no father, Abdullah's son. He will be given under the guardianship of Abu Talib. Now, if we are at that stage where now Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is at the age of, he's 8 years old. Again, if you think about it, nephews, nieces, 8 years old, what's going through a child's mind, etc. And he has lost, in a way, the three key people in his life. Father, even before he was born, then mother, all very loving people in their life, and then the very loving grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. Now, Abu Talib, strangely enough, from amongst the uncles, he is one of the poor ones. Now, what do you think happened? We've been through that this is nobility. From amongst the Quraysh, and Quraysh are all of those people, all of those families, and from them, amongst them, Hashim, he is the governor of Makkah Mukarramah. Hashim's son, Abdul Muttalib, becomes the governor of Makkah Mukarramah. Then Abdul Muttalib, one of his sons, is Abu Talib. And he is so poor that actually sometimes there's no food at home. Yeah. Now Abdul Muttalib had how many, in a way, okay, think about his assets. There was a time when he sacrificed 100 camels. And we're talking about in those days camels, like we have, imagine someone's got 100 Mercedes, 100 BMWs, whatever, and at least, he's rolling in millions, if nothing else. And then 100 camels he sacrificed then. Then we talked about when he went to Abraha and said to Abraha, you have stolen 200 of my camels. Yeah, so Abdul Muttalib was, that family was rolling in it, if you like. And then it comes a point when he gives his very beloved grandson to a son who's got no money. So much so that there's no even food for 3 days, for 3 times in a day. What happened? What was one of the key things that happened? I mentioned early on. Famine. Remember? Famine came, and actually, I mentioned a lot of cattle, a lot of animals were lost. Yeah, and so that's one of the natural things that happened. That how the status of an aristocrat family changed. But even then, Abu Lahab was still rolling in it, and because of his basically whatever he used to do, was Abu Talib, very different personality, and therefore he was content and happy with however much he had. Now, so bearing in mind, Abu Talib's financial position is very weak. Yeah. So much so that there used to be no food. Sometimes they say that actually there used to be only enough food that either Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could eat, or Abu Talib's sons, the 2 major sons that I mentioned, and they will come to be. We will get to know them very well during the course of these sessions, inshallah. One is Ali, karamallahu wajh, who also becomes the son-in-law of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he's the first cousin of Rasulullah, and the other one, Ja'far. He is known as Ja'far al-Tayyar. Now, so there's not enough food for 3 people to eat sometimes. So it's either Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, who mentions it? Baraka. Who's Baraka? The slave girl, known as Ayman. She mentions it that she never heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ever complain about food, even in his childhood. Like people, young children, they cry. When it's like you don't get food, you don't get milk, you don't get chocolate, whatever, and someone else is eating and you don't get it, people, it's just natural, people cry, young children cry. And she says, now she's been with him throughout his life, and she says he never used to cry for any food. And so much so even that sometimes he would just go and drink Zamzam, in the morning, and he will say, I'm fine, I don't need food. And also one of the other things that I mentioned is that when we wake up, really don't want to see our faces like our hair disheveled everywhere. And now we're sleeping on mattresses and everything is hunky dory. But in those days, people think about it's desert land. Perhaps sleeping on the ground, perhaps on just a mat. And imagine how much dust and dirt will be on your head, and your head will be basically your hair disheveled, everything. And she says, and also other people witness, that whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to wake up, his hair will be so set as if someone had just combed his hair before he woke up. And not only that, but he would have surma in his eyes, in his blessed eyes, when he wake up. So these were already unusual things happening that the family was experiencing. Now, Abu Talib realized that actually, whenever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sits with us to eat, actually there's enough barakah in the food that we can all eat, we can all have it. But otherwise, there's only so much food that only if there are 5 people on there, it wouldn't fill them. All 3 people will eat properly and 2 people won't eat properly. Now, then Abu Talib used to say to his family, wait for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Only eat when he comes and sit and eats with us, and then we will have our food. So it's like how the barakah is coming to the family of Abu Talib. Now perhaps that's again one of the reasons why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Abu Talib to actually, so that these stories, his barakah could be narrated, centuries after that. Because if he'd already gone to a prosperous family, no one would have known that actually such blessings came with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we already know that when he went to the wet nurse Halima Sa'diya, how everything changed in her world. So the barakah in the food used to come through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this is really, so now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is growing up with the family of Abu Talib. Financially weak position. Now the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam could take a number of approaches. Well, perhaps he obviously realized as well that because of me, barakah is coming and food is becoming sufficient for everyone. Yeah, that's one thing. He also knew that he doesn't need food all the time. He can drink Zamzam and everything is fine, and therefore he doesn't need to do anything. Or secondly, so this was one option, that because of me, barakah is there anyway, I don't need to do anything. Secondly, my grandfather Abdul Muttalib gave me to Abu Talib, and Abu Talib took the responsibility. Therefore, let's just enjoy it. Why do I need to do anything? Because Abu Talib is responsible for me, whether he has food or not has food. And one of the key things that Arabs used to basically give up their life for one thing was wafa, word. If you have a sound word, you are a sound man. If you can't stand by your word, you're not even worthy of being called a man. Abu Talib had given a word to Abdul Muttalib, his father, that I would look after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Abu Talib did that he would even his own sons Ali and Ja'far may not get food, but he would make sure Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has it. And therefore Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could take that second option, that Abu Talib is responsible for feeding me, and therefore I don't need to do anything. But this is where it all comes in, responsibility as a very young person. And I mentioned the last session that we believe Rasulullah, the Prophet is a prophet even before he declares his prophethood. Yeah, we started all the way from Adam alayhi salam, how the light of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet travelled through the heads and through the wombs of a number of generations until he reached Abdullah and Amina, and then it came in the form of Rasulullah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so his example is the best example for us. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doesn't actually sit tight. He thinks that I need to do something. Yeah, I need to support this family. But perhaps Allah has given me to this family so that I support them through working. And so as a young person who at the age of 9, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started doing a job. What was that job? He started doing a job of a shepherd. Yeah. In those days, in shepherd, he started grazing the sheep. Yeah. And so he would go with other shepherds of that time, who were all around his age, or perhaps some over 10. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam maybe just about 10 or just over 10, and some of them a lot older than him, about young people like age of 14, 15. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started grazing the sheep. He would go out, and now we're talking about Makkah Mukarramah is already desert, yeah. And the actual town, and there's in terms of sanitation system, that's really bad, etc. We've already covered all that. So they would go out where actually there used to be greenery, so that sheep could graze there. And this is again, so one of the key examples that we learn from very early age. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gets that sense of independence. That firstly, I need to feed, or I need to contribute towards the financial situation of my uncle Abu Talib, but also I need to stand on my own feet. So it's the sense of independence that's there at a very early age in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, in terms of the historically putting things in context. Some people say, well, the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam only became prophet at the age of 40, and therefore we only need to take example from the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam from the age of 40 when he basically revealed the first revelation. Whereas we firmly believe that prophet is a prophet. The only one thing that you cannot acquire in this world, or you cannot, there's no point trying this world. Everything else you can try in this world, and according to your intentions and your contribution, your efforts, you will get it. One thing that cannot happen is getting prophethood. Prophets are handpicked, selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are selected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from amongst every single person that has come and that about to come. So when all the souls were there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala handpicked, selected the prophets. So prophet is a prophet from even before he is born. And as a result, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about his childhood. There are references to his childhood. And we all know Surah Al-Duha, which is Surah 93. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes a reference to that in the Holy Quran and says, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَوْنَا. Did he not find you an orphan and give you shelter? And he found you wandering and embraced you. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَوْنَا. Now, this is reference to his, him being orphan, and then also how shelters is being found. First with Amina radiallahu ta'ala anha, then with Abdul Muttalib, then with Abu Talib. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam went through all of those experiences that I mentioned, that there is a spiritual teaching for all of us, never to forget one's past, one's trials, one's environment and origin, because all of those things are going to come into play during the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and inshallah through these series we will touch upon all of them. And also always turning one's experience into positive teaching for oneself and others. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the Holy Quran testifies to that when he says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Indeed, with every difficulty there is relief. Verily, with every hardship there is relief. So when the parents are lost, then Abdul Muttalib he takes the shelter. He's given shelter to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As a result, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gets that status in Arabia at a very early on. Then with Abu Talib, he's bringing barakah to the family of Abu Talib. And the key thing, as a young person, we talk about education and schooling and everything else. Now, his educator was his Rabb. Rabbil Alameen, that we say. Rabb means nourisher. Rabb means that who's always by one side. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to that in the Holy Quran as well when he says, Ar-Rahmanu allama al-Quran. The most merciful who taught the Holy Quran to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And obviously, before revealing that Holy Quran, the Prophet ﷺ had to be prepared to receive the revelation of the Holy Quran. So the Prophet ﷺ had no one else educating him than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something phenomenal, that's something to be remembered, and that will come, we will basically talk about this throughout these series. And when the Prophet ﷺ was grazing the sheep, he developed a specific relationship with nature. Now, nature is something that, especially in our lifestyle, we don't really come to realize and appreciate the value of nature and how much nature still plays a huge part in people's life, and it used to play an incredible part in the life of every human being before the Industrial Revolution. And the reason is, if you take the example, people used to have fields. They would have to grow crops, and they would have animals, and because of those animals, they will have milk at home. They will have butter at home. Imagine having to because if you didn't have fields, you lived in Leeds 6, where there is no co-op nearby, no Tesco, no Sainsbury. You didn't get food. You didn't get milk, because you haven't got animals. What would you do? No milk, and because of no milk, no margarine to put on toast in the morning, yeah. And then, okay, fine, we'll have cereals. How cereals are, where do they come from? Yeah? Grain, wheat. Yeah, if you didn't grow any crops, no wheat in the land, you're not going to have those little things, Rice Krispies or cereals either. Yeah, okay, we'll have roti, but no roti either because there's no wheat. So how how people's lives were so connected with nature, yeah, they're connected with land and with the heavens, sky. Now you can understand the wheat is grown on the land. How about the sky? Well, it all used to grow because of rain would come from the heaven, from the sky. If there's no rain, there's no food. There's no wheat. There's no animals aren't going to be able to graze, and therefore no milk. Even though you might have animals, as a result, people were very close to nature. People would pray. People would now. We look at the weather report because we want to go to Birmingham tomorrow and want to see whether it's going to chuck it down or whether it's going to be fine or we need to take brolly or whatever. Yeah, they used to check the weather reports by looking at the stars to see whether they're going to have wheat in 6 months down the line or not. Because if it's not going to rain, then there's not going to be any crops and things like that. So as a result, you become closer to nature, and you think in a very different ways and in different contexts. And so the Prophet ﷺ, lived in desert, apparently devoid of life, repeatedly shows and proves to the watchful consciousness the reality of life. Yeah? Although living in desert, out there grazing sheep, you realize that how is to the person that's really being watchful and conscious, the reality of life is understood in that desert where there is nothing else. Yeah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions a number of times in the Holy Quran as well that among His signs is this, that you see the earth humble because it has nothing in it, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the rain down, and as a result it grows things, and it produces things, and then sometimes something else happens, and even though the flowers are there, everything is grown, it can suddenly be wiped off. Yeah, and so you see the reality of life, that there was nothing, something came into existence, because and it came into existence not because of you particularly doing anything. You saw the seed, but then something else happened to it. So there's a divine plan going on, and as a result, a life came into existence, and that life, it could be crops or whatever. That life fed other lives, yeah, because of that crop growing, other people are being fed. Now, as a shepherd, it's very interesting that Prophet ﷺ says that no prophet has come to this earth without actually grazing sheep. Every prophet has been a shepherd. Now, in the quiz I mentioned what's that job? That Allah Subhanahu wa Taala gave it to every single prophet. Now, in our eyes, apparently, it's not one of the most glorious jobs. Yeah? So imagine someone's got £1,000 in his pocket. Yeah, and there's plenty of supply of money coming in. I'm talking about material status. Yeah, and you said to them, well, can you take some pet animal for a walk every day? Yeah, would you do that? We won't do it, because it's like, well, why do I need to do that? Or someone said, well, let's go to a jungle and actually let's live with the animal for a few days. We wouldn't do that, well, unless you want to be famous and go for, why I'm a celebrity to get me out here. Yeah, but it's like that. And so here, a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not all the prophets, and then the prophet that's going to lead mankind. The status is so incredible and phenomenal, we can't even imagine the level of that status, and he is there with the sheep. And with the sheep, have you ever grazed sheep? Have you ever grazed sheep? No? They don't really listen to you, yeah, for a start, yeah, and you'll be saying something else, and they'll say, man, it's all about, yeah. So it's like, and it's very interesting, man, because it's like whatever they're saying, yeah, in our language especially, it's all about me, I, yeah, I'm not going to listen to you, it's all about man, yeah, and it's like molding them, yeah, and so it's a training ground for all the prophets, that an animal, yeah, that's not an animal. So if you said, oh, we go for a walk with lions and with tigers, with elephants, yeah, and you put your chest up and think, well, I'm mingling with the animals, yeah, and you'd be proud to tell that, to tell everyone, say, well, I took 10 sheep for a walk the other day, and I said, what, loser, you've got nothing else than your iPhone to listen to. It's like that kind of, the culturally, that's what, so it's like now, I'm talking about modern terminology, using that, but it's always been human phenomena, always been the same. Yeah, it's just in different shapes and different forms. But why that is the number of things. Firstly, training to prepare people. Ultimately, the sheep that you graze, they become very loyal to you. So it's having that, building a rapport with the animals. Yeah, and the men are going to be even worse than that. But at least if you've experienced that with animals, then nothing can be worse, because you always think men are going to be better than the animals. That's one thing. Secondly, it takes you back to the nature. You spend time with the nature. You realize it gives you time to contemplate. It gives you time, I've just said that, as shepherd, the Prophet ﷺ, learned solitude, patience, contemplation and watchfulness. Now, it's not that he didn't have those qualities already, but this is the divine way of working. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never works without adopting means. So he took the Prophet ﷺ through this journey. And then the Prophet ﷺ also acquired a deep sense of independence, yeah? That he was not dependent on his uncle. And his uncle didn't feel him as dependent. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ started bringing something back, and actually Abu Talib's family used to be fed by Rasulullah ﷺ. So the responsibility turned. So what we learned from very early on, from his young age, the key, before I move on, the key things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants everyone to work. Yeah? And this is how, and from a very early age, when I mentioned the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a number of options. Two of those options being, sitting on his, putting his hand on his hand, basically not doing anything. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out there and did things. Secondly, that no job is a low job. If you think about it, it's like as long as you are doing something and it's doing the right thing, then there is always blessing and barakah, and that is more liked than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than you not doing anything because you think you are greater than whatever job it might be. Now then, after that, we move on to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a young man. But I think before that, even one of the key things that I wanted to touch upon as a young person, the other things. Now, obviously, we talked about independence and everything else. But as a young person, as a teenager, there were lots of temptations in the society. Now, we talk about that we live in a society these days which is very corrupt. We talk about there's so many temptations. All the things that we have right now, if not to the same extent and same level, then the Prophet ﷺ had all of these things in that society, in that culture. Although now they're more advanced, in terms of, like for instance, in those days they had clubs and theatres, maybe not with those spotlights that change colours, etc. But they still had the clubs. People used to go and drink, and then they go clubbing. I think it's only men who used to go clubbing rather than women as well. But women used to have brothels. Drinking was in terms of they didn't have to worry about taxes going up on drinking, and therefore people couldn't afford drinks. Drinks were common, and people would drink all the time, and they used to have lots of containers at home. So if you think about pubs, clubs, theatre, and perhaps not cinema and not cinematography as we have now, but theatres were there at that time. So one day, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that while he was grazing his sheep out there, and they didn't used to come back every night. Sometimes you'd be gone for maybe for a week or so, and then all the shepherds they decided, they said, well, there's a wedding on tonight in a particular I think it was town near Makkah Mukarramah, or it could be in Makkah Mukarramah, basically a wedding on, and there's going to be singing and dancing. So if you think about it, things haven't really changed. Now we have DJs, but maybe they did have at that wedding people from outside to do singing and dancing. So the shepherds said, all the shepherds said, let's go tonight. Yeah, we'll leave the sheep here and we will go and partake in this wedding. Uninvited guests, let's get crashing, but we will get to see the singing and dancing. Now the Prophet ﷺ says, with the shepherds, because he was part of the shepherds, that group of friends, he also went with the shepherds. Yeah. Now to the wedding, and so it's night time. And as soon as they got there, yeah, the educated, the Prophet ﷺ educator being Rab, he never left his side. Rasulullah ﷺ. The Rasulullah ﷺ said, as soon as he got there, and they sat down. So if you think about it, whether it's theatre, seats in the theatre, or you're sitting down to actually a song's going to come on, or something else, people are going to come on to start dancing. The Prophet ﷺ says he fell asleep. Suddenly something happened to him that he, even before they came out to do the dancing, he just fell asleep, and he fell asleep so fast. Basically he was so fast asleep, they only woke up in the morning when the sun rays was hitting him. Yeah, so the sun, basically, that if you think about it, perhaps he went there 8 o'clock at night, that it was in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, when the sun had properly come out in a hot country, that he woke up because of those, because the rays hitting him. And so the concept that we learn from him, from that incident, is that prophets are ma'soom. Ma'soom is a terminology that you will hear, and it's used amongst Sunnis and Shias. Yeah, ma'soom means that prophets can never commit a sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always protects them from committing a sin. Ordinary people, or even apart from prophets, every single person can commit a sin. Yeah, whether or not they do commit a sin is a different issue. Whether or not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects them is a different issue. So we believe that all the great imams, the great scholars, the waliullahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects them. Yeah? But they may or may not commit sins in their lives. There's a possibility there's potential of committing a sin. But with the prophets, there's no potential of committing a sin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always protects them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never allows them to commit a sin. So this is what we learn from, is the concept of a ma'soom, that prophets are infallible, that they never committed a sin. And that's why even when the Prophet ﷺ went along with his peers, the shepherds, to go and see this program that was going to be on, he fell asleep straight away, and he didn't wake up until the morning when everything was over, even the whole wedding was over. But the fact is that all the things, all the temptations that we face now, they were there, but the Prophet ﷺ never got involved in it. Now then we're talking about now this is 4 years effectively that he was grazing the sheep, being a shepherd, from the age of 8 to about the age of 12. Now Abu Talib wasn't used to import and export. He was a businessman. They used to go to Syria and take goods from Mecca to Syria, and they used to sell there. They used to take the whole caravan there, and they would sell that stuff there, and then they would bring the money back and spend it for 6 months, and then in winter. So they used to alternate. They used to go to Syria on one side of Saudi Arabia, and then Yemen on a different season to the other side of Saudi Arabia. Now, and so it's narrated that perhaps Abu Talib didn't really go to, made many trips while Rasulullah ﷺ was really young. But at the age of 12, Abu Talib decided to make a trip to Syria. Now, the different narrations, that Abu Talib was in two minds, that if I go to Syria, who's going to look after my young nephew, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Also, it is narrated that it is mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ himself said to Abu Talib that if you go to Syria on this trip, business trip, who am I going to stay with? So ultimately, Abu Talib was in 2 months. If I leave him, anything can happen. And in those days, basically, the journey was going to take 3, 4, 5 months. And anything can happen to me, anything can happen to my young nephew Muhammad. And he really didn't want to part with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he decided to take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with him. Now the journey is a long journey on camelback, and it's through the deserts. It's going to take literally weeks to go there. And they didn't used to take young people with them, especially their own sons. They might take their the servants as young people. But so other people were also shocked. Why is Abu Talib taking the Muhammad with him? But ultimately they realized Abu Talib is really attached to the nephew, and nephew is really attached to the uncle. They said fine. Now, when they used to go on this caravan, there was a place called Busra, before Syria, and in there there used to be a monastery, a cell where monks used to live, rahibs used to live. And then basically this was a place where they had specifically set up a monastery there, a cell for monks, a place for monks to be there. And there was reason why they used to be, they had been there, and they'd been there from generations. One generation will pass on to the other generation the knowledge. They used to have some sort of knowledge. That no one knew about this knowledge, but they didn't really care about anyone. Arab tradesmen used to come there and find. They used to stay there for a while, and then they used to go to Syria. Now there is a monk, the key monk. Other monks, they used to maybe say hello, hi to these tradesmen, these Arabs when they used to come. But there was a monk called Buhaira, 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 who didn't really talk to anyone. He never came out of his cell. Yeah, but when on this trip, yeah, he saw that basically, and they used to. But what he used to also do, every time a caravan would come from Arabia, from his window, he used to see them. In a way, so he'll be waiting for them, and then whenever he would want to see some signs, and when he didn't see any sign, he didn't care about them. And he saw that actually with this caravan, there's a cloud following them. Yeah, and also not only that, he saw that basically cloud was following them. Then the young lad went and came and sat underneath the shade of a tree, so that a young person was under a shade. Basically, cloud was following them because sun is too hot, so cloud is providing the shade. But this young lad went to sit underneath the tree, and the rest of the caravan is going and there's no cloud over them. You see the difference? So the person that was being covered by the cloud, why the cloud was over the whole caravan, was because of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and went and sat underneath the tree, so he's already got shade, and the rest of them haven't got shade. Yeah, Buhaira suddenly clicked. Yeah, and he sends out his servant saying, tonight there's a feast at the monk's cell. Now everyone is invited. Now the Abu Talib and all his companions and friends, they're worried, they're concerned that this guy has never said hello, hi, and today he's putting out feast for them. What is he going to put in that food? There's that concern that suddenly how come he's laying out a dinner for us. But anyway, they said, well, he's a monk, he wouldn't do anything, he wouldn't kill you, etc. It's fine. Yeah. So they're happy also that we get some respect from the monk. So they all tonight dressed up, go to the dinner. Buhaira is saying, is everyone's here? They say, yeah, everyone's here. Where's the no, I don't think everyone's here. Now, where's the young person? They go, oh yeah, we left him with our camels. We need to look after the camels. We saw. Buhaira said, what kind of people are you? You all turned up here and you left your young person. And when sometimes people are reminded, they start thinking, yeah, really, we shouldn't have done that. We should have got the young person as well. So they go and get Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they all have the feast. They eat, they enjoying themselves, and Buhaira is constantly watching the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, young person. Yeah. After they finish the food, the Buhaira starts having conversation with the Prophet ﷺ, and so he's obviously having a conversation, but he's in a way testing, interviewing the Prophet ﷺ, because he's got suspicion. He had read in his books that there will be cloud following a caravan, and there's a tree, only a prophet would come and sit underneath that tree. Yeah, and the Prophet ﷺ was sitting underneath this tree, but he still wants to make sure that the Prophet ﷺ is the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes, I swear by Lat and Uzza. Yeah, Lat and Uzza were the names of two gods of Arabia. Yeah, and like we say whenever we want to really show how truthful we are being, we say Allah Qasam. We will say like that. Arabs used to say a lot. By Lat, by Uzza, meaning I ask you something by them. So in other words, that you won't, whatever I'll ask you, you will give me the answer. Yeah, yeah. So Buhaira says, I swear by Lat, whatever he said. Prophet, don't mention those names to me. I really dislike them. Yeah. So now Buhaira's getting some hints that obviously all the Arabs worship Lat and Uzza, and this young person is saying, don't even mention those names in front of me. I really don't like them. Yeah. So he goes by Allah, the Lord of the heavens and the earth. Prophet said, yeah, go and ask me what you want to ask. Yeah. So all of these signs, are being confirmed. Then he says, then he asked the Prophet ﷺ to uncover his, basically remove shirt from his back. Yeah. And what he wanted to see, that Prophet ﷺ, the sign in the books were, in the earlier books, that a prophet would come that would have a raised area between two shoulder blades. And the Prophet ﷺ used to have a raised area, and there used to be hair over it. So if you think about it, we can't really explain, and obviously we don't need to go into too much detail, is that there was basically a little bit of meat, if you can say, over the back of Rasulullah ﷺ, and it was known as the seal of prophethood. So that was going to affirm, so in a way, a physical sign given to Rasulullah ﷺ that no other person had in his time or even after that he would be a last prophet that would have a raised area between his two shoulder blades. And when Buhaira saw that, he said, basically all his signs got confirmed, and he said, whose son is this? Yeah, Abu Talib said, he's my son. Buhaira said, no, it can't be your son. Where's his father? Buhaira goes, yeah, actually you're right. He's my nephew. His father, Abdullah's passed away. Yeah, so even to that degree, Buhaira knew from his books that the prophet will come that will not have a prophet, that will not have a father. Otherwise, when Abu Talib said, I'm father, Buhaira had no reason to dispute that, because Buhaira didn't know that. Why would he say, no, you're not his father? And the Holy Quran says in Surah Baqarah that they recognize the prophet as they recognize their own sons. Like the son that you raise, that you have with you, and you recognize, you see them growing up, and you recognize them, you see them. And the Prophet ﷺ was known to the people of earlier books as their own children were known to them. Yeah, so Buhaira knew so much. Now Buhaira said, I want to give you advice to Abu Talib, that Buhaira said he's a prophet that we've been waiting for. Yeah, my advice is that don't go to Syria, because they are people of the earlier books. And also look after this child of yours, because the people are going to turn against him, in particular the people of the earlier books. Now, why would the people of earlier books would turn against him? Because they would be waiting for years, centuries, for the last prophet that's going to lead mankind to come in their family and in their tribe. And suddenly he's come to the nomads. He's come to these tribes. They're hardly known to anyone, and so jealousy was going to be natural, and therefore they might harm this young child, this young person, and that's why Buhaira just advised. Now, some narrations say that the Abu Talib basically turned back from he was so taken back by this that he said, I shouldn't really go to Syria. But others say that he went to Syria he basically sold his goods, whatever trade he had on his caravan. He rushed back because he was concerned about the safety of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, so this is so after that. So this was the first trip to Syria of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, amazing thing is that after that, the Buhaira was basically passed away very quickly. If you think about it, if the monks were already waiting for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they would have been there for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to actually tell everyone when he declared his prophethood that yes, he's the one we've been waiting for, and then the course of history would have been very different. Yeah, because if so many people that have been waiting for actually recognize someone, and they say, well, he's the one that we've been waiting for, let's not fight him, let's not prosecute him, let's not persecute him, let's not abuse him, because he's the one he's the savior of mankind. The course of history would have been very different. But all these people and some of the other people that will be mentioned in the course of these sessions, after they told their prophecies, after they played their role in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they very quickly passed away. And there were reasons why that happened. Now, after that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made several trips as a young person to Bahrain, to Yemen, to Syria, basically all the Middle Eastern countries, because that was first trip. And then when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam reached the age of 17, 18, 19, 20, he used to basically go on his own with the caravans. Now, one of the incidents happened that's known as Battle of Al-Fujjar. Now, why? And that happened, at the age of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's age was around 20. But before that, I guess one of the other things that the Prophet, so we mentioned about the Prophet sallallahu as a young person, getting involved in business and doing his own independent things. But he was also, again, the language that I'm using to try to explain some of the concepts is no worthy of the status of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, the reason why we're using it so that you can understand or relate to some of the things that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. Now, he was a very active person. Yeah, and he used to love archery. He trained with the people the young people of his time, and he was a great bowsman, basically archery, and so much so the Prophet ﷺ says in one of the hadiths, the one who trains in archery and then leaves it, he has disobeyed me. So in other words, if you take it up as a training, as an area in which you want to become an expert, then if you give up, then that means that you actually disobeyed the Prophet ﷺ because he liked it so much, and you took it on and then you gave up. Yeah, and that doesn't seem a good sign on your part. Now, to be a bowsman, a great bowsman, you need to have good reflexes, you need to have a good sound body, you need to be physically fit. And anyone who's a sportsman, whether you play football or it's martial arts, etc., we think that, basically Jangir Badr happened. Jangir would happen, and these people who were just in the mosque all the time praying, doing nafli ibadat, worship, they just picked up the swords and there we go, and killed 10 people here, 15 people there. It didn't happen like that. These were, in the time of the Prophet, they were trained warriors. And the Prophet ﷺ trained with one of his uncles, who was also his radai bai. He and the Prophet ﷺ drank the milk from the same woman called Saveba, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. He known as Hamza, who was uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a son of Abdul Muttalib, and who was also. So Abdul Muttalib has a son called Abdullah, and also Abdul Muttalib has a son called Abu Talib, who was the guardian of Rasulullah ﷺ after the age of 8. And while Abdullah has a son called Muhammad ﷺ, Abdul Muttalib also has a son called Hamza. And inshallah, I don't want to spend time now talking about Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. There was a reason why the Prophet ﷺ became very attached to Hamza radiallahu ta'ala because both of them trained together. Both of them basically grew up together. Abbas, who was another son of Abdul Muttalib, Abdul Muttalib's son Abdullah. Abdul Muttalib also had a son called Abbas, who was the brother of Abdullah, uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was actually born after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah? So the one that's closest to of his uncles, closest to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of his peer group was Hamza radiallahu ta'ala. And Hamza radiallahu ta'ala was a natural warrior. Yeah, and we will talk about his role and his contribution in the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so they both trained together, and they both because Hamza was a natural warrior, and for a warrior you have to be really good with your sword and everything else, spears and archery, arrows. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam learned archery and also trained in other areas. So what does that tell us as a teenager? So as a young person, that you can be an active sports. You can be an active sports person. You should take part in physical activities, and you should not just you should be ambitious. You should be rather than just kicking around. You should whatever you put your effort into it, you should basically become good at it. Now, most of us, we are keen in sports, but perhaps I think sometimes I wonder whether our eyes play more sports than our legs or our hands. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to all become active and physically fit in whatever we do. So this is this is the other aspect of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of these things are happening while up to the age of 20, and even after that he carries on, because Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we will talk about how physically fit he was, that he did something remarkable after his prophethood. So after the age of 40, and again, some of it was, it was a miracle, but also physically, Prophet ﷺ was very fit even after the age of 40, and then even he was basically fitter than anyone else. And this again, physically, we're talking about just to explain the whole concept, and you can only remain physically fit if you watch out your diet and also actually do some exercise. Now, obviously, those didn't used to be gyms, and therefore go on there building your muscles and whatever have you. But there were other ways of doing remaining physically fit. Now, Fujjar, and we will just finish at that battle, and it's very interesting. The reason why I mention him there's a long story behind it. Effectively, the culture in Arabia was, I mentioned, the word meant everything. If you gave someone a word, then you would stand by that word. And one of the words that they used to give to someone was that we will provide you, we will protect you. Yeah, we will protect, because in those days it's like, for instance, thinking like that, and it happens even in this day. Diplomatic immunity. If something happens in a particular country, the person goes to another country, and because of their relations, they grant that person diplomatic immunity. As a result, they don't hand it back to the government where the person's flown from. And now we have obviously human rights, court of justice, etc. The number of trials take place. Well, in those days there was a gang culture. Has anyone of you been in gang culture? No one's going to put their hands up there. Everyone would love to be in gang culture because it sounds so great. In gang culture, what they do, obviously you know more than I do, is basically, everyone, they have a tie, there's a tie between members, and whether one of your members done something unjust or justly, whether he's done something right or wrong, everyone in that gang is going to stand by that. One of the things that happens in the gang culture. Everyone's going to stand by that. So, and because if you don't stand by that, then what's going to happen? There's going to be another gang. And that gang, if you don't protect your member, then that gang is going to take a lead, and there's a competition. You're not going to let that happen. So in Arabia, there's no government. They are men of word, But other than that, there's no government, there's no rule of law, no nothing. There's gang culture basically, and everyone's going to stand by. If you allied with another gang, another tribe, and now if you like gang culture, if you move it to, perhaps if you want to use another civilized term, it'll be tribe culture. Yeah, if tribes got together, and as a result, something happened to a member of your tribe, then you are going to bring war on the other tribe, on the other culture, and that's why the whole tribe concept I'm trying to explain so that you understand it. Now, for Jar, what happened? Long story short, there was a man who was a man known by the name of Amir. He asked for protection, but from another tribe. The tribe gave him protection. Yeah. Now Kinana, that tribe, I mentioned early on. I think one of these were very hot-headed people, Kinana people. Yeah. If you remember, the guy who went and defecated the church that Abraham built, he did something on there. He did a poo in that church to actually make him think that, you know, I'm not going to say much, but see what we think of your church. Was a person belonging to Kinana. Yeah. There's another example that I gave earlier on as well. Also, Kinana people are a bit hot-headed people. Now, Kinana said, you know, the tribe that gave the protection was known as Khawazin, from another, not from Quraysh, from outside Quraysh. Now, when he was given protection, a person from Kinana said, "Do you give him protection from Kinana as well?" Yeah, Hawazin said, "Yes, we give him protection from everyone." Yeah, basically, Kinana person, a person from the family of Kinana, he killed him in a treacherous way, and killed him in one of the sacred months. And sacred months, even before Islam, Arabs did not used to fight in a sacred month. Yeah, in one of the sacred months, and so he killed him. So he did two things. Firstly, he killed him unjustly. Secondly, he did something treacherous and broke what Arabs always believed in, that you should never fight in a sacred month. He killed him in that month. Now, everyone's really upset. But Quraysh, everyone, Ghalib's tribe, Ka'ab's tribe, Murrah's tribe, Qusay's tribe, Bani Hashim, everyone, basically all the Qurayshites said, well, Kinana is a member of our family. We have to protect Kinana. As a result, a fight used to take place every year. It went on for 4 years. You know, sometimes you hear when talking about the Prophet ﷺ, you say before the Prophet ﷺ, they used to fight for years and years and years over nothing. One man got killed, and all of the tribes are fighting for years and years and years. And the Prophet ﷺ, as a young person, especially in the last year, he also took part in that fight. And he said what he used to do, basically, his uncles like Abu Talib and all the others, they used to be the arrowsmen who used to throw the arrows, and the Prophet ﷺ used to provide them with the arrows. So he didn't shoot anyone himself, he didn't kill anyone, but because he was part of that tribe, he used to provide them with the arrows. So again, in terms of the whole thing is about the Prophet ﷺ lived in that society. He didn't do anything haram, he didn't commit any sin because they're masoom, but he actively took part in everything that happened in that society. That's what we need to bear in mind. And again, I'll come on to that, especially in his after the age of 25, when he becomes a very young, established, grown person, a man amongst other men. What was his contribution, what was his role? Now, as a result, after 4 years, because of one death, so many deaths are taking place. Now, people got fed up, Qurayshis got fed up, and they said, we need to do something about that. Yeah, especially Zubair. Do you remember Zubair I mentioned? Who was one of the uncles of the Prophet ﷺ, who was involved in his parley in the raising up when he was under the Abdul Muttalib. Because he was, if you like, the second eldest son of Abdul Muttalib. He said we need to do something. And as a result, Hilful Fudul took place. and that is known as the League of the Chivalrous, the league, the pact of virtue. And another event happened, which again led to a great change in the psychology of tribes in Arabia, young people, especially in Arabia. They said this is too much because of this tribe culture, the gang culture. One man gets killed, and we are involved in it every year. We need to do something. And again, something happens. Another oppression, oppressor oppressed someone, and people just woke up. They said, we need to stand up for justice. And this was, again, the Prophet ﷺ played a key role in establishing that Hilf al-Fudul. He took part in it, if you like. The key role was really taken by the Hashemites. Zubair, one of the uncles of the Prophet ﷺ, led that change. And now, so I think we're going to leave it at that change.